The Glass Spaceship. Drifting through a nebula. Dark screen. You wake first to a sound that is almost a whisper, 100 tiny fingers tracing the curve of glass. The hull answers in a soft, even patter. Nebula motes tapping like rain. They do not fall so much as press against the clear curve, a scattering of pale points that slide and linger, then slide again. Lily lies very still and listens. The sound is patient. It is the ship breathing around her. Her bunk is narrow, lined with a patchwork of blankets that smell of warm starch and lavender, and she can feel the very smallest rhythm of the vessel under her shoulder blades. There is no sudden shudder, no urgent lurch. Instead, a long, low hum threads through the hull, steady as a distant tide. The light outside is a thickness of muted color, not bright, but alive, as if someone has set 1,000 tiny lamps a long way off and asked them to whisper. The glass rain keeps time with that hum, and for a moment she lets herself be measured by it. She slips one foot from the covers and rests it on the cool strip of metal beside the bunk. Her slipper catches the dim reflection of the hull. The glass is cool to the touch, and in that coolness she recognizes the start of her day. There are rituals that exist because they are necessary, and rituals that exist because they hold the shape of things. Lily's are mostly the latter. She moves with them as one moves through the house of someone you love. Familiar hands in familiar places. She pads across the short corridor. The galley door sighs at her touch, soft and practiced. A row of small star panels along the inner curve is already dimly glowing. They wake as she passes, a string of tiny constellations turning themselves up like candles. The galley itself is a warm oval of steel and glass, the counters rounded as if for careful hands. There is a kettle with a slow, patient whistle. In truth, it is an old comfort press that sings its single note before settling back to a content murmur. Lily sets the press on, and the sound grows into the room. A high, wholesome whine that folds into the ship's hum. The nebula's patter gathers against the outer skin, bright as sifted sugar. She reaches for a favorite mug, the clay a little rough where the glaze has worn thin, and cups her hands around it as if it is a small hearth. Steam rises in a lazy plume, carrying the scent of bergamot and dried citrus, a scent she chooses because it feels like anchoring. She breathes it in, slow and steady. The steam fogs a small circle on the glass, and for a second pale starlight becomes a soft, private view. There is an exactness to making tea in this way. Lily measures with the hand of someone who has been held by these actions. 1 spoon of leaf, the press down, the waiting. The kettle whine eases. The press clicks once, polite and final. The sound is small and domestic in a ship that could be mistaken for anything but home. She marries the sound to the glass patter and lets both keep her company. The routine roots her, the way the first stitch in a blanket catches and refuses to unravel. If this quiet voyage is the sort of place that soothes you, stay with us for the drift. There is no hurry. Let your breathing slow to match the ship. She arranges the tiny lights over the counter, a neat row of touch panels that she calls her fairy panels. They glow when pressed, warm amber like a remembered sunset. She likes them low in the morning, like a whisper rather than a voice. With a fingertip, she nudges one brighter, then another, until the galley wears the look of a small, gathered hearth. The sound of crockery is soft, a spoon against ceramic, the gentle scrape of a knife. Every noise is cushioned by the glass rain until it becomes a lullaby. Today, she plans to make something slow and consoling, an old recipe translated into ship terms. Where once she might have rolled pastry for a pie, now she will fold a spiced filling into layers of thin, steamed cloud bread and slow steam it until the sugars sigh. Where there would have been the oven's steady warmth, there is the galley heater, a wide, flat panel beneath the counter that breathes heat like a patient animal. The heater hum and the ship hum become a single chord. The steam from the kettle curls and meets the warmer breath of the heater, and the whole thing smells like possibility. She measures out sugar with the same soft decisiveness with which she carries stories to people. Spoonfuls are weighed by intuition rather than a scale. The sugar is not bright white, but a soft amber, flecked with pieces of crystallized spice that catch light like little comets. Cinnamon is dusted as if through an old sieve, and the air fills with the scent of it. A scent that is in truth more memory than ingredient. She stirs in molasses with a wooden spoon worn smooth by habit. The spoon makes a low, round sound against the bowl, and Lily listens to that too, letting it knit with the press of the kettle and the glass rain. Petitions of motions guide her hands. She folds, she presses, she pats. Each movement is its own reassurance. There is a small ritual of tasting as well, a fingertip dabbed into the filling, the cool tang of citrus, the warm pinch of spice. She hums without thinking, a soft line of no words, just breath-shaped melody. The ship answers with a faint vibration under the floor, as if pleased. From time to time she glances through the oval window above the sink. The nebula outside is not a solid thing, but a gauze of color, drifting and pooling, sometimes thin and thread-like, sometimes dense and velvet-rich. Motes move within it the way flakes might fall through a shaft of light. Tonight, or rather this morning, though the light knows no clocks, the motes are pale blue and milky, like the inside of a shell. The view steadies her. The glass rain, she thinks, has its own music. The patter is the refrain of days aboard this ship. There is a little cabinet where she keeps the small comforts for visitors, a tin of biscuits that never quite disappears, a jar of candied peel, and an old packet of paper napkins with a faint floral print. She fetches 2 cloths and lays them out beside the counter. There is a practical economy to this done with love. People drift through the galley in pairs or singly, drawn as if by a tide. They come with small problems and leave a lighter thing behind. They come with heavier burdens and leave them pared down by being spoken into the roundness of the room. As she works, she thinks of the people who will come. Seamus will arrive at his usual pace, which is measured by the rhythm of his cane, and the way he tells the same story in a slightly different order each time. Rose will come with soil on her hands from tending the hydroponics, and her jacket will smell faintly of green things and rain. The twins, Mara and Joss, will dart in and out, pockets full of baubles. The galley holds these regulars like a small rope holds a flotilla, not forceful, but essential. A soft chime at the hatch tells her that someone has opened the corridor door. Steps are muffled underfoot, and the door swings wide to admit a gray-haired man with a scarf wrapped twice around his throat, though military green and scuffed. He carries a thermos and that particular look of someone who has been up with the dawn simply because dawn felt like a good companion. "Morning, Lily," he says, his voice thin but warm. Seamus moves with deliberation. His shoulder brushes the counter as if remembering the weight of the world, and he takes in the small lights, the steam, the bowl she stirs. There is a small smile at the corner of his mouth that has a map of years in it. "You're making something," he observes, like an old friend spotting a familiar town across a puff of fog. "Something to keep us from thinking too hard," she replies, and that is the realest answer they could give each other. Hemus hums an agreement. He sets his thermos on the counter with a soft thunk and leans his cane against the wall. His hands, when he offers one, are thin and book-mended, as if softened by many afternoons of folding paper into shapes. They speak of small things. Seamus tells her about the view from the observation nacelle the night before. A long, pale ribbon of light that looked like spun glass. He remembers names and places as if they are ornaments on a tree. These fragments of conversation are not meant to be solved. They are the kindling of company. Rose arrives later, carrying a tray with small pots of sprouting bulbs. Hydroponic soil clings to her cuffs like a gentle confession. She shows Lily a new kind of bulb that glows faintly at its tip, a little pale pearl of life that seems to drink the ship's low light. Rose's hands are practiced. She tends to the plants like someone who believes in small miracles of care. "You mustn't let them go thirsty," she says, and for a moment the two women are gardeners in a greenhouse that floats through the dark. Lily listens, grateful for the simplicity of such advice. The pots are arranged on a windowsill where the nebula light will wash them in a gentle, patient way. Even the plants have their place in the ship's liturgy. The twins arrive like a pair of small storms, cheeks bright, eyes full of the serious mischief of children who know the way of cozy things. They deposit a handful of small, shiny objects on the counter. An old compass with the glass cracked. 2 tin soldiers, a painted horse with a broken tail. The galley fills with the soft collision of those sounds. Laughter, the scrape of a stool being pulled, the rustle of sleeves. Lily divides a small square of the warm filling dough and presses it between her palms for each child. They take the warm coin and press it to their cheeks, solemn as if sworn to a secret. The ritual of breakfast swells and settles like a small tide. People come and go. The galley is both a stage and a confessional. Conversations are kindly and slow, like stirring honey into tea. Someone recounts a dream about walking through a lavender field that smelled of copper. Someone else speaks in half sentences about a neighbor's cat that likes to nap on the observation deck. These stories are not dramatic. They are the gentle weave of a community. The ship carries them all in a stew of warmth and small sound. Seamus offers a comment about the heater's particular note today, a lower, more pleased hum, and Lily laughs. They trade stories, then settle into companionable silence, each listening to the same steady chorus. The hum, the kettle's last sigh, the glass rain marking time. By mid-morning, the galley smells like cinnamon and soft sugar. Lily sets the tray into the heater's slow-breathing oven, a long, shallow arch beneath the counter that warms rather than bakes. The filling begins to thicken like a remembered story, and the sugars caramelize into a gentle, toffee-sweet fog. The ship answers with a soft chime, like an oven beep but gentler, translated for a vessel that prefers conversation over command. It is, she thinks, the kind of sound that is meant to mean nothing alarming. Everything in the day is slow because nothing in their lives here is meant to hurry them. At some point, a small gust brushes the hull. Not a violent thing, but a measurable current in the drift of the nebula, a pulse of movement in the great ocean of color. The glass rain thickens for a moment, and through the hull Lily sees the motes gather into a faint skein. The ship leans into it like a boat under a soft wind. The galley door eases, and the touch panels along the arch let up a thinner light as they sense the change in atmosphere. A child laughs, and the laugh is like a bell. The twins have taken to cutting thin sheets of sugar into shapes that resemble tiny windows. Lily watches as Joss concentrates, tongue between his teeth, making a window that is more moon than square. Mara pinches a corner and giggles at the way the sugar refracts the fairy panels. They tape their windows to a string to hang them later in the common way. The ritual of making a thing to catch the light is the same as hanging a prayer where the sun could find it. They call them nebula windows, and everyone nods solemnly as if they have invented a new holiday. As the sugar cools, Lily tests a sliver. It cracks like gentle glass, and the sound is sharp in the soft room. She sets a small tray of them aside to chill further. The twins fetch an old wooden chair and place cushions. There is an economy of arrangement in the galley that suits their needs. Someone brings forward a low stool so that the children can reach the counter without being perilous. There is care, like a small tide of hands arranging things into shape. The afternoon stretches. The light in the galley takes on a honey hue. Voices are low, conversation thinning to the comfortable half-words between friends. People drift toward other chores. Seamus towards his seat by the viewport to read from a dog-eared book. Rose to the hydroponic banks to tenderly check the bulbs. Someone murmurs a tune, and the galley's walls respond with the ship's hum. The pace is unhurried, as if time itself had been taught to move gently whilst inside this glass cradle. It is in such a gentle stretch of time that the small disruption occurs. It is almost comical in its littleness. A sling of current through the nebula catches the outer canopy of the observation nook. A little retractable hood made of a flexible, transparent film, and tugs on it with the insistence of a child wanting attention. It clicks at the latch, and then juts out at an odd angle. For a brief, certain moment, the canopy sits like a tilted hat upon the ship, one corner bowed, a seam crooked. Lily notices it, because she always notices the small things that are ever so slightly out of tune. It is the sort of blemish that could be left for a day, and no one would mind. Yet the way the light catches that bowed corner makes her think of an umbrella turned wrong in a storm. There is a soft twist of worry that sits under her sternum, the same small tug she feels when a neighbor's door is left unlocked. She goes to the observation nook and reaches out to touch the canopy. It gives under her fingers with a soft, almost apologetic creak. There is a tiny hairline fracture in the seam where the latch snagged. Light slips through it, a little needle of the nebula's blue, and Lily's hand rests on that seam like someone checking a sleepy child's breathing. She breathes out and tells herself it is small. It is not a thing that will ruin the day. It is, at worst, an inconvenience. Even so, the idea of a broken canopy nags at her, like a pebble in a shoe. She can imagine the uncomfortable thought of rain, in their case, motes, finding its way where it should not. She imagines the observation nook no longer holding the same hush. She imagines Seamus leaning his ear against the glass and finding the ship's song a little off-key. She touches the latch as if to mend it with the force of attention alone. It clicks, and the click sounds wrong to her. It is a slippered sound in a room that otherwise keeps its steps light. She sits on the nearest stool and allows the kettle's last whimper to fill the pause. The galley hums, and the sugar treats lie cooling in their tray. People go about small things. The twins practice threading their nebula windows on a thin strand of string. Rose arranges the bulbs in a line that looks like seedlings preparing to march in formation. The hurt of the canopy is not yet a crisis. It is a fissure of unease that fits neatly into the day's fabric. Lily thinks of taking up the latch with a small tool, a tidy mitten of grease and ribbon bound to her belt. She imagines the carefulness of smoothing the seam with her thumb, of realigning the clip. She could do it quickly now, before the tide of visitors swelled for the evening. Or she could set it aside and allow the ship to hold its small imperfection, trusting that nothing grave would come of it. The question sits like a pebble that will require either removal or acceptance. She begins by tidying the counter. Hands set about the ritual of clearing crumbs and wiping the steam away in broad, circular motions. The galley's surfaces respond, the glass brightening like a face eased of thought. She folds the tea-cloth with a precision that is half habit and half prayer. In padding back to the worktop, she hums a low line of tune, an unremarked thing that keeps the tempo even. The decision, small as it is deferred. There are more immediate comforts to arrange. The sugar windows must be stored for the evening's little gathering. The filling must be spooned into its resting mold. Those small domestic victories that keep a house afloat beckon like small lights on a shore. She arranges the trays and sets the timer, not on a clock, but a small, old-fashioned sand globe that sits on the shelf. The hourglass is as much ritual as it is measure. Turn, watch, wait. People begin to come in twos, then threes, drawn by the scent and the low promise of company. A young woman who lives in the aft berths brings a dog-eared scarf. An elderly couple brings a jar of preserved fruit they have been saving. Each arrival fits into the pattern, as if part of an old pattern being threaded anew. They talk quietly of small triumphs, a repaired hinge, a successful harvest of tiny leafy greens from a hydroponic bank, a child who finally slept through the hum one night. The galley is full of these soft fixings. Each story is a way of anchoring, and each person leaves a trace of the day on the surfaces. At some point, the ship's chime, a sound she likes to think of as discreet, announces a message on the communal board. A notice that in 2 nights they will share a small celebration, something to do with the nebula windows and the light. The notice is written in cheerful, careful script. The idea is that each person will hang 1 nebula window in the common way, a slow garland that will catch any motes that come too close and make them look like jewelry. It is simple and joyous, and the notion warms Lily in a way that translates into a smile that rests at the edges of her face. "That's a fine thing to do," Seamus says, patting his cane. "A map of our days." The small, cracked canopy sits in her mind like a punctuation mark. She is aware, as she hands a warm sliver of the filling to an arriving neighbor, that she has not yet touched it. The thought of mending it is not heavy so much as inevitable. Yet here, in the thick of the galley's rhythm, she chooses to let the small worry be, and to prefer the present company. There is an honest weighing of priorities that has nothing to do with grand decisions, and everything to do with where your hands are most needed right now. Lily moves from task to task with the steadiness of someone who knows how to keep people. She arranges the nebula windows in a shallow basket to take their chill, talking all the while with her visitors about nothing large. A pair of neighbors gossip, in kindly tones, about a misremembered line from an old play. Someone asks for a bite of the still warm filling, and smiles like a child who has been given a secret. Each small exchange smooths the day into a soft sheet. By late afternoon, the galley is a warm loaf of light and sound. The sugar windows have set into translucent jewels. The filling is tucked into its resting molds, and a ribbon of steam curls from the heater. Outside, the nebula moves with the patient, indolent grace of an ocean tide. The hull keeps time with 1,000 tiny taps. The canopy remains bent, a small foreignness in the ship's roundness. Lily finds herself glancing toward it, measuring it against the low profile of the day. She will come back to it. She knows she will. For now, there are hands to hold, stories to be given, and the simple pleasure of making something with care. She passes a plate around, and people take a treat and press it to their lips as if naming an old friend. Laughter skips over the galley like a pebble over water. The twins show off their earliest attempts at wiring a small pendant light from tiny star panels. Rose demonstrates patiently how to coax a sprout into polite, obedient growth. Seamus makes a small, absurd observation about the ship's hum that has everyone chuckling. Everything is soft and slow and anchored in the way of daily kindness. Outside, the nebula's light has deepened to a blue as thick as velvet. The glass rain keeps its tiny percussion, and within that percussion, the ship and its people fold into their routine. There are no great storms on the horizon. There are small, bright things, motes, laughs, the crackle of sugar, and the latent problem that is a crack in a seam, a thing of small consequence and of small worry. As the daylight, such as it is here, mellows, the galley prepares to shift toward evening. Lamps are nudged a peg dimmer. The fairy panels go lower. A pile of throw blankets appears as if called by the mood, and people select theirs with the quiet deliberation of those about to settle into a good book. The twins declare that tonight they will hang their galaxy windows on the commonway string. There is a sort of private exultation in this, a child's belief that one's small creation can hold back the dark outside. Lily watches them, holding a plate that has begun to cool. Her fingers still retain a faint scent of spice that will not rush off. The ship hums, and the glass patter keeps time. She thinks of the latch again, of the seam, of the needle of light that sneaks through it. She thinks of the practical kindness it would take to fix it, and of the more generous kindness that will almost certainly arrive when someone notices and decides to mend it for her. She thinks of the way the community gathers not only for feasts, but for small repairs, for sharing a cup of tea and an extra pair of hands when a seam needs smoothing. A message slips along the hull, a gentle vibration in the floor by the galley that is the ship's way of announcing a new arrival. It is a small, polite buzz, not something that demands attention. The hatch opens once more, and a figure appears, silhouetted against the faint corridor light. They step in with a quiet motion, as if mindful of the mood already there. Their eyes find Lily, and a smile spreads, the sort of smile that promises nothing more dangerous than company. Lily sets down the plate and moves to greet them. The galley shifts as if a star has been nudged, the conversation forming new circles and new cross lines. In the hush that follows, the small fissure of the canopy waits like a held breath. It does not yet need resolving. It can be the soft tension that keeps the day honest, a little question left unsettled, so that there will be something to do tomorrow when the light changes, and the work is easier in a cooler hour. For now, there is the warmth of the galley, the slow music of the ship, and the low, patient chatter of people who have come to trust this place. Lily moves among them, a quiet center, hands busy with plates and napkins and neat, forgiving gestures. The nebula's glass rain continues its quiet percussion and soothes like a shared benediction. The day waits for no one. But within this oval room, everyone is allowed to keep their own pace. Later, she will tend to the latch. Later, they will set up the string of nebula windows and let them gather the motes until they glitter like a procession of tiny lanterns. For this hour, the galley is exactly what it needs to be. A warm room in a drifting house, full of low voices and the sound of sugar cracking. The ship and its people breathe in time together, and Lily breathes with them, feeling the small, contented ache of being needed and being safe. Outside, the nebula deepens, and the motes press their quiet hands against the hull. The sound grows only slightly, like rain after a long drought begun anew. Inside, a kettle is set to warm, and a tray of still-warm treats is divided into gentle portions. The twins run forward with their box of nebula windows, each smaller than a hand. They present them like offerings, faces lit with the honest pride of those who have made something themselves. Someone lifts the basket and carries it towards the commonway. Someone else produces a length of thin rope that will hold the windows like small flags. Lily follows them with a cup of tea and watches the slow procession. A small caravan through their ship home, people trailing light and sugar and hands reaching for each other. The crack in the canopy is a small notch in her attention now, but it is not forgotten. It hums under her thoughts like an instrument tuned slightly sharp. She thinks of how easy it would be for someone to tie a bit of ribbon around the latch and hold it closed for the night. She thinks of the way Seamus will offer an old strip of leather from his satchel, because he always carries things that might be useful. She thinks of Rose's careful fingers that could smooth the seam almost shyly. They gather the nebula windows in a slow, winding line. The galley doorway becomes a little opening to the commonway, where the string is hung. Each window snaps into the rope like a small jewel finding its place. The light in the galley drops a shade, and the fairy panels tuck themselves into a glow that is more landscape than lamp. The ship's hum steadies, and the motes outside glitter as if in an audience. The act of hanging the windows is both celebration and prayer. Not in the loud sense, but in the practical, matter-of-fact way of people who believe small acts matter. The twins run back to Lily, breathless and triumphant, eyes full of the kind of victory that needs no applause. They press their palms to her hand and ask if she thinks the canopy will be all right. Lily looks at the seam again, sees the way the light slips through and imagines the ribbon of leather or the careful stitch that could hold it. She smiles, a small, steady thing. "It will be," she says, and in that phrase she deposits as much intention as she can muster. It is not a promise of certainty, only of effort. The ship's glass rain continues, like a metronome for these soft moments. People settle into their chosen corners. Plates are passed. Stories are picked up and laid down like old quilts. The little communal string of nebula windows trembles slightly as a shipmate brushes against it, and the light flashes like a throat clearing. There is a lull, and in the lull Lily feels the day tilt toward something gentler. She thinks of the latch again, and of the small axe that will put it to rest. A strip of leather, a patient's needle, hands that know the language of seams. For now, she places a warm hand on the back of a chair and watches the motes move. The ship breathes, and the galley breathes, and the people within it breathe together like a chorus that has learnt to sing in lower keys. Outside, the nebula's blue deepens to the interior of an ocean. Inside, the sugar glows amber, and the fairy panels keep their low, home light. When the moment comes that the galley will dim its lamps, and the gathering will thin into quiet, there will be a choice to make about the canopy, but tonight the ship holds them with the same soft pressure as a hand at the small of the back. Lily tucks a blanket around the smallest of the twins and returns the empty tray to the counter. The thought of the seam is a small companion, a pebble in a pocket. It is manageable. It will be mended. For now, there is tea, and singing only in fragments, and the delightful gleam of the nebula windows, however young they are. The glass rain keeps its time, steady and unhurried, a lullaby of tiny taps across a vast, dark sheet. Inside the galley, people talk in low voices, and the ship stores those voices like an insurance against loneliness. Lily stands at the counter, hands folded over a mug, and lets herself be full of the present. The seam will wait a little longer. The nebula windows will catch more light. The ship will hold them both. The ship breathes on, a slow, steady exhale that fills the galley with a softness like old wool. People drift toward the exits with the gentle deliberation of those who do not want the evening to end too quickly. Plates are cleared carefully, cloths folded and put away as if smoothing the hems of the day. The string of nebula windows in the common way catches a stray light and scatters it quiet as a secret. Lily stands a moment longer by the counter, the weight of other people's small acts folded neatly into her hands. The seam in the canopy is a little bright needle in the dim. She can feel it there like a pebble in a pocket. She does not shuffle it away. She keeps it close enough to remember to mend. Seamus lingers as others begin to step into the corridor. He pads slowly across the galley, cane tapping a patient punctuation. His movement is small, disciplined, the kind that speaks of many careful mornings. He stops near Lily and watches her, the way someone watches a child steadying their first wobbling bike. "That seam," he says, and there is no urgency in his voice. Instead, it is the tone used for offering a suggestion or telling someone a truth that has been waiting for an audience. "It'll be all right," Lily answers, though her voice has less certainty than the words. She finds she does not want to tackle it tonight, when the galley is full of warmth and the lights are low for lingering. The fixing feels like work to be done with daylight, or with the kind of focus that is easier in cool hours. Yet Seamus does not allow her to place it aside as a burden. "I have some leather," he says, smiling as if revealing a small surprise. "A strip I keep for things like this." He reaches into the bag at his side and draws out a narrow band of worn leather, darkened at the edges, neat where stitches once saved it from ruin. Might hold it for a night. Before she can refuse, Rose is at his shoulder, her hands smelling faintly of mineral water from the hydroponics. She produces a spool of translucent thread, the sort used to mend the delicate mesh that keeps moisture where it should be. The twins, sensing the mood of gentle industry, bound back from the doorway with a dish of the smallest tools, an old blunt needle, a pair of scissors with flowered tape around the handle, a fragment of thin wire. Others appear with oddments, a scrap of clear film donated from a neighboring cabin, a length of ribbon, a small loop of bright cord. It is quiet and unplanned, the way meals sometimes fill a dining table with plates rather than plans. People drag small stools into a rough circle and lay out their found things like offerings. The act of collective making arrives like a tide that has been toying with the shore all day and finally decides to come in. Hands gather the leather, hold the seam, test the latch's mood. They talk in low tones about how long the ship has borne them, about the days when a small repair was the occasion for tea and a story. The conversation is not a blueprint. It is the sound of neighbors deciding to see to one another. Lily watches them, feeling a strange warmth that is not only from the galley heater. She remembers each person's small kindnesses. Seamus's odd bits in his bag. Rose's patient coaxing of bulbs. The twins' willingness to fetch things as if they have been apprenticed to usefulness. Watching them work is a sort of baptism into the idea that repairs are never just about mending objects. They are about mending the edges between people. They start with the leather strip because it is the most immediate and practical thing to hand. Seamus holds it taut, while Rose threads the translucent line through the needle with a care that makes her look like a woman performing a tiny, exact miracle. The twins sit on the floor, legs curled, the light catching in their hair as they hand over pins and small clips, eyes wide with the importance of what they are allowed to witness. Lily kneels beside them, her hands in the small dim pool of lamplight. She shows them how to hold a seam without forcing it, how to coax two edges close enough to be friends. She speaks softly. No commanding instructions, simply guidance the way you help someone learn a familiar path. Her fingers are deft, a lifetime of folding and smoothing giving them a quiet firmness. The needle moves slowly, the thread pulling a line of quiet between the two faces of the canopy. Each stitch is a measured note, and the room listens. As they stitch, the galley hum settles like a blanket. The motes outside patter at the glass in small staccato bursts. Inside, the occasional chime from the ship is a soft punctuation rather than a call to action. A neighbor fetches a small warm cloth and presses it to a knuckle scraped by the needle. Apologies are whispered and refused because the task itself is a pleasure. There is laughter, not loud but bright in the way of buttons being threaded through a child's coat, a sound that glows in the chest. At the heart of the remedy, someone proposes a notion. Why not make the mending part of the celebration? Why not fashion the repair so that it is both useful and beautiful? The idea catches. It is a way of turning a small fracture into something deliberately chosen. They talk about adornments, tiny nebula prisms that might catch the light, a ribbon of Rose's green thread to remind the seam of soil, a small leather tab for strength. The twins clap, delighted at the notion of turning a fix into a festival. They begin again, this time with more thought. The leather forms a backing. The translucent film sits beneath, reinforcing without hiding the seam's honest line. Rose threads little nebula windows, leftover scraps of sugar glass through the edge, and each prism sings a micro-chant when it brushes another. Someone suggests adding a loop so the canopy might be anchored neatly when it is retracted. Seamus produces, with his habitual modesty, a tiny brass button the size of a coin, wrong-footed but handsome. It becomes the tongue for the loop, a small piece of metal that insists on usefulness. Slowly, carefully, under the ritual of small hands and softer words, the canopy is mended. It takes time in the way that good cooking takes time, not hurried but purposeful. Time is lent by the whole circle, the twins' eagerness, the neighbor's steady presence, Rose's quiet judgment. They stitch and smooth, then stop to hold the seam to the light to see how it sits. The nebula outside throws blue through the glass and the film and the leather, and the stitch glows like a seam on a sailor's sail. When at last the latch finds its place with a new, reassuring click, it feels like applause. No one really applauds, of course. They smile and pat hands and send a chorus of small noises around the room. Lily's hands are dusted with sewing thread. She can smell the faint leather and the mineral scent of the film and the lingering honeyed sugar from earlier treats. Something blooms inside her, a warmth that is not merely gratitude, but a deep, soothing knowledge. This community will take care of the small things, and by doing so, will hold each other steady. But some care finds form beyond that immediate mending. A neighbor, who had been quietly watching with an expression that holds the kind of thoughtfulness you only find in people who have known both loss and larder, rises and excuses himself. He returns with a roll of fabric in subdued stars, a long strip of soft, supple cloth that seems both practical and decorative. It is a canopy cover, an extra guard against the long fine motes that sometimes find their way through a too-thin seam. The neighbor explains that it belonged to someone who loved bright linings. He thinks the pattern will do well to give the canopy a gentle laugh when the wind catches it. People begin to add to the gift. A neighbor with nimble fingers, who is usually quiet and measured, offers to sew the cover properly on. Another boasts a length of small, battery-masked lights, very low power and very soft, that could be threaded along the inner rim to catch the prisms on the nebula windows. The twins insist that there must be an ornament or two. They produce the smallest nebula window they had been saving for something special, and press it into the circle like a badge of honor. The making of this new cover is not rushed. It is slow and affectionate, a seamstress's conversation held in stitch. Rose measures, Seamus pins. Lily holds the cloth taut and watches the pattern of stars in the fabric as if reading them aloud. They choose colors that will not glare: pearl blue, soft amber, a muted green that picks up the hydroponic bulbs. Even the choices of color are made with an eye to the night. Nothing that will jar when the ship dims its lights. When it is done, the cover is more than utility. It is an object of communal intent. It carries on it the handprints of many. Someone ties a short ribbon, that bright cord from earlier, into a tidy bow, and secures a nebula window pendant at its center. The pendant catches the fairy panel light and fractures it into a calm spectrum. There is a small ceremony of handing it over. Lily presses her hands to it, feeling the stitch and the curve and, perhaps most of all, the fact that it was made because others wanted her to be sheltered. She is offered the gift with such softness that it would be ungracious to refuse. Her voice, when she speaks, is small and dampened by feeling. "I don't have words," she says, which is a way of saying she has all of them, and they cannot quite fit. The community understands this. They never require grand speeches. Their language is action. They decide, spontaneously, that the canopy's replacement cover should be tested in the most ceremonial way possible, by walking the common way under its shelter and letting the string of nebula windows salute it. So, with more light warmed by the fairy panels, they affix the new cover, tie the ribbon, and secure the brass button with a quiet pride. The canopy folds back and then, with the softest of motions, presents its new face to the ship's interior. As the canopy slips into place, the twins run ahead to fetch an extra nebula window to hang at its join. They dangle it so that each passing mote will find a prism to flirt with. The light catches and throws itself back into the galley in a scatter of muted gems. For a breath, the whole room seems to hold its breath and then release it as a contented sigh. People clap small private hands together. The act of mending becomes celebration, and celebration becomes the repair. They linger then, not because there is anything left to do, but because the evening has found its own excellent purpose. A plate of warm treats is produced as if summoned by the occasion. The twins dance around, insisting this must be done properly, with sugar and a song in their throats. Someone starts a hum, a simple tune-like thing with no words. Others join in because it is impossible not to, and the sound fills the galley like steam. The hum is not meant to wake anyone. It is simply a way of stitching the moment to their memory. Conversation drifts back to small stories. Seamus tells, with great solemnity, of a day on a smaller ship when a storm had turned their sails into ribbons, and they all sat and sang until the sky forgot its anger. Rose recounts the absurdity of a sprout that had once refused to be pruned until it was given a name. The twins contribute ideas for future projects. A string of nebula windows that would span the whole ship's length. Little lanterns fashioned from melted sugar panels. An aft-deck picnic for the coming light. Each idea is met with applause or mock-serious debate over feasibility. The argument is the kind that binds, not breaks. As the night thickens, the galley slowly empties. People drift back to their berths with blankets over shoulders and small parcels of treats tucked under arms. Good nights are exchanged with faces brushing shoulders, the kind of touch that is almost a whisper. The twins, high on the evening's success, fall asleep curled in a corner on a pile of cushions, their breaths small and even. Seamus takes his usual seat by the viewport, his cane placed against the wall, a small book opened at a page he loves. Rose gathers her pots and murmurs to each bulb like a benediction. Lily remains to tidy the remaining cups and set the kettle for a last stretch of warmth. She moves with the practiced economy of someone who knows how to leave things standing ready for morning. The fairy panels are nudged lower and lower until they make a landscape of dim light across the counters. The heater breathes the low, even heat of a thing content with its work. The nebula's motes continue their steady percussion against the hull, a rain that has long forgotten its edge. Before she goes, Lily takes one last walk to the observation nook. The canopy now sits in its improved guise, the stitches neat and the cover graceful. A small nebula prism hangs at the edge of the seam, catching the outside blue and throwing shards of it back into the room. She touches the leather reinforcement with her palm. It is warm from the contact of many hands. For a moment she allows herself to name each finger that took part. Seamus's steady thumb, Rose's exacting pinch, the twins' clumsy eagerness, the neighbor's tiny brass button. It feels like a small catalogue of affection. She steps to the window and looks out. The nebula is a deep, slow thing tonight. It runs in low bands of color that slide past the hull like distant curtains. Within it, motes blossom and then fade softly, not unlike the memory of a laugh. The glass rain keeps its lazy tempo, a comforting metronome that suggests nothing urgent. For a small while she allows the sound to be all there is, unembroidered by thought. The ship hums, the mote patter sings, and the city of people within the hull sleeps under the same slow sky. Back in the galley, she puts the last trays away and sets the sand globe on the shelf so it catches the faint light and promises that an hour's vigil will pass if anyone wants it. She scoops a small portion of the remaining treats into a ceramic pot to leave for late wanderers. She moves with the care of ritual. The spoon placed just so, the lid set with familiarity, the napkins folded into the small, polite triangles they favor. Each corner of the room seems to sigh in contentment, as if satisfied that the day has been ably tended. She prepares for bed in a way that honors the day. There is a gentle washing of hands, not hurried, the water warmed by the galley heater and scented with the last of the bergamot. She dries her hands on the towel Rose had embroidered for her in days gone and sets it on the peg. She chooses a small book from the stack by the counter, a thin volume of little poems she likes for their weathered sentences, and carries it with her as a talisman. There is a private ritual before sleep that she has kept through many crossings. She goes to the little window above her bunk and breathes in the night air as the window lets in only the faintest rim of cool. She turns a tiny star panel to its very lowest and watches a pale dot of light as it becomes, in the dark, like an old watchful eye. She places the book on her bedside shelf and sets the mug she had warmed earlier on the sill, the remaining warmth a small friend. She smooths the patchwork blanket across her legs and tucks the twins' handmade charm, their proudest nebula window, near the pillow. Before she lies down, she thinks of the seam. It is not a remote problem anymore, but a thing held by many hands. Such thoughts are not the ones that keep her awake. Rather, they are soft anchors that she carries with her. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening to the ship. The rhythm of the hull is steady, a low chord that the rest of the world will not find intrusive. The motes whisper at the glass in an even hush, like someone running a thumb along the lip of a bowl. When she lies down, the covers hold her like a cup holds tea. She nestles into the patchwork, feeling the fabric's small map of stitches and smells, lavender and the faint caramel of sugars. The window presents the long, deep shade of the nebula, but her mind is lit inside by the day's small kindnesses. She breathes slowly, and in that breathing hears the echoes of the galley's night. A muted chuckle, the sound of a chair nudged, the soft sink of the heater's last breath into evening stillness. The book on her shelf is not opened. Tonight she prefers the memory of stories told aloud. She thinks of the song that had risen among them while the new cover was being made, the hum that threaded through the room like a warm ribbon. The thought is comfort enough, and she hums a fragment to herself, a tiny borrowed melody that seems to belong to no one and yet to everyone. The tune is carried into the quilt of the ship and returns to her in the form of the hull's steady thrum. Outside the hull, the nebula moves with a lazy grace. Motes press at the glass and retreat, curious fingers against a cool face. Their tiny impact is a sound that has settled into her bones. It is a kind of assurance that even in a vast dark there are small motions, small touches that make the world feel less vast. If you are listening now, you might notice how the sound seems to echo in your own chest, as if the ship has borrowed your breath for company. Night settles its soft hand over the galley. The fairy panels have dimmed to the color of embers. The commonway's new garland of nebula windows trembles once with a stray current, and then rests, like a crowd letting its cheering die down into contented murmurs. Someone passes by the doorway and leaves a blanket folded across a stool for a late visitor. The gesture is simple and speaks of a community that expects to be there for each other at odd hours. The twins' breathing slows, and in the dark pocket where they rest, their small hands tighten around crumbs of sugar and sleep like the ships they imagine themselves to be. Small vessels hugged by larger seas. Seamus turns the page in his book, and the sound is faint. Rose moves along the hydroponic banks, murmuring to each sprout as if to coax sleep from the green things as well. All the little rhythms arrange themselves into an architecture of rest. Lily takes a last slow look at the galley from the doorway before she slips into her bunk. The room looks like a held thought. Neat, soft, ready to be re-entered in the morning. A stray nebula window catches a pane's corner of motolite and scatters it across the counter like a private constellation. She smiles quietly at the sight, then turns and lets the ship's hum gather her back to the bunk. She arranges the blankets with the care of someone tucking in a child. There is a small, polite reverence to the act. She lays her head on the pillow and allows the night to fold her in. It is not the same as leaving the world. Rather, it is the act of resting within it, upheld by both the physical enclosure of the ship and the moral enclosure of the people who live aboard. The seam has been mended. The canopy will do its work. The garland of windows will catch the motes and give them back as jewels. In that small half-light, as she lets her thoughts bloom and settle, she offers a gentle permission to herself and to anyone listening, that it is all right to soften, to let the day's muscles uncoil. The ship will hold its course. The nebula will carry them with the same easy patience it has always shown. You may, if you like, let your shoulders loosen and your breath lengthen. The glass rain will be there to keep time. There is a finalness to the night's small rituals. A last cloth put on the counter, a book laid aside, a cup emptied into the sink. Each an act of tidy faith. Lily thinks of tomorrow, of more tea, of more hands, of more small fixes and more small festivals. The future here is not dramatic. It is a catalogue of kindnesses and the practice of constant little repair. It suits her. Her breathing becomes slow enough that the ship's hum and her pulse begin to align. The motes outside continue their soft percussion, an unrelenting, tiny rain that refuses to be anything but soothing. The method of the galley's light becomes a distant memory, as sleep, light as dust, settles inside her eyelids. She dreams, briefly, of the nebula windows strung from stem to stern, glittering like a procession of small saints, of hands threading them, of tiny faces lit by their own proud works. When she wakes, perhaps the seam will need a final pat, or perhaps it will be enough that now and then she remembers a neat strip of leather and a brass button and the way a community gathered. For now, that is a problem for a morning that will be bright in its own way. Tonight is for letting the world reduce itself to sound and smell, and the slow curl of limbs against quilts. If this voyage has been soothing to you, and if you find the idea of being held by a small, moving house comforting, you might like to remain with the drift. Stay as long as you need. Allow the steady rhythm of the ship and the quiet voices in its galley to wrap around your evening. Lily breathes with the ship for a while longer, and then she lets her consciousness loosen like the fraying end of a thread. The galley recedes to a shape in her periphery, a warm oval of light with its little, faithful people inside. The nebula motes press against the glass as if keeping time to a lullaby they were taught long ago. Somewhere a kettle cools, and the twins murmur in their sleep. A faint, contented hum rises and settles, and with it the last of the day's small tasks fade into rest. You may dim your screen now if that pleases you. Turn your device face down or lower it to the dark, and let the sound be the thing that steers you. Imagine the ship's glass curving overhead like a soft ceiling, the nebula pressing its tiny lights closer, and the community inside, hands warm and steady, tending to one another. Let the hum be your pillow. Let the glass hold your dreams as it holds its own motes. The galley light grows thinner, and the fairy panels tuck themselves into a faint, watchful glow. The nebula's blue murmurs at the hull. Lily sleeps, the patched canopy snug above the observation nook, the little nebula windows soft on their string. All is kept, for now, in the patient company of people who know how to stitch a life together. Good night from the Glass Spaceship. Drift well.